So, welcome to today's podcast of On Air, episode number 3, titled Genoa Opens America. Today is really a story about a region of Italy and how it was responsible for the true discovery of the United States before we're told that Columbus discovered it. It's about an explorer who we've been told was of Spanish heritage. And it's also about the biggest financial institution in the world today. Historically, it's the region has been considered the capital of the powerful maritime republic for over 7 centuries, and culturally, it is the birthplace of some notable explorers, including obviously Christopher Columbus. So, I'll put it over to you, Phoenician Hunter, regarding your research on the region in northern Italy, Genoa, and its relevance in maritime history and leading up to where we are today. So, welcome.
Hi, yeah. I didn't really want to speak about Christopher Columbus that much, and I only touch on him in the article, as you've read, because there's so much disinformation about who he is, his background, and also there's plenty of books and researchers already discussing him. But what I found was no one was really discussing Genoa, who he was connected with. They would either talk about the Vatican, Pope, or go off on that tangent. America is really opened up once the Ottoman Empire take Constantinople, basically, because that whole region, and anyone who's looked at my work knows that my main focus is merchants. That's who I follow in history. What are they up to? What are they doing? Because for me, the title of a book that I love is called Merchants Make History, and basically that's it's true. Our history comes from them, their movements, their activities. So I always focus on the merchants, and I'm saying, well, okay, what was Genoa doing at this point? So Genoa and Venice at this point pretty much were the sole defenders of Constantinople. They were like the last defenders of that whole region. And it meant more to them than anyone else because all their trading routes were going through the Black Sea, the East. And so if they lost that, they lost all those trading routes, all those colonies. So for them, it was business. It's money, basically. It always goes back to that. So the last defenders, once they lost that, they knew that we need to move shop. Basically, we need to find new opportunities, new trade routes, new merchandise, basically, because they knew they lost those to the East, to the Muslims. So then all of a sudden, within a few years, America is discovered. Oh, what a coincidence, How fortunate.
Can we reference the time frame where we're talking when it was actually discovered? 1492. Is that the read?
Okay, wait. Okay, so okay. America's discovered 1492.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in the conquest of Constantinople is 1453. So 39 years.
39 or so years later.
Okay, so all of a sudden they've lost all this potential, the East, the trade routes, and all of a sudden it's okay, guys. We've got this new continent to come and gather all the resources from. So it doesn't matter. It actually benefits them because America, as you know, is rich in resources. And so when I first read about this, I'm saying, I don't believe this. That all of a sudden they lose that, and then they find another opportunity. So what I discovered and what the research indicates is that they already knew about America. And they had known about America for a very long time. But what they were doing is they were just holding on to it, just keeping it aside for when they needed to use it and exploit it, basically. So they're still happy trading in the East, using all those resources. And then when the opportunity arises, they'll go and back up. It's basically back up for them.
Can I just maybe interrupt you there? And if we can we maybe backtrack, because that's a really quick succession of what's happened. In your article, you open the article with the cod, right? I found that quite interesting, particularly when you look at it on a global level. People might say, well, what's a fish got to do with, the history of the world, for example? So can you maybe, I think that would be of interest to our listeners, if you can just maybe give a bit of a background on that.
Okay, why I put that story in, and I came across it by chance. It was really interesting that the Basques, Spanish region, were one of the best fishermen in Europe. And They were famous for their cod, their Atlantic cod. The story goes that no one could discover where they were getting all this cod from because usually it was in the North Sea, which the Scandinavians were fishing, Iceland and all that region, but the Basques were getting cod from, no one knew where it was coming from.
Mm.
So what this researcher had discovered was that they actually were getting it from North America. Now now I'm just trying to find the dates again. This was hundreds of years before America was discovered. Okay, so what this researcher was indicating was that other peoples knew about America before the discovery, but they were keeping it a secret for their merchandise.
Yes.
For their products. This is a tradition that has gone back to the days of the Phoenicians, where they would not tell their competitors where they're getting their minerals and resources
minerals.
from.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
Yeah. So the behavior of merchants, and it doesn't change. It doesn't change throughout history. So they were keeping, everyone was keeping a slice of America to themselves, basically, and that's the opening to why then Genoa was doing the same thing. Now, to go back to when Genoa lost Constantinople and that region.
To the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah, that's right. So I think they could see the writing on the wall before the actual fall of Constantinople. So what they were doing, again, you follow the movements of these merchants. Genoa was one of the richest. This is another thing that people don't know. At that time, Genoa was one of the richest, places, city-states in the world, and they were sort of one of the first international bankers. So they were the ones who were lending money to sovereigns, monarchs around Europe. So they weren't just traders. Anyone who's read my work will know that, the merchants become the money changers become the international bankers. It's the same people. So they were the international bankers of their age. So what they were doing is they started moving their operation from Genoa to Spain. Specifically Seville, around that area, and Portugal as well. Then they're the ones who start sponsoring. See, I mean, this is the other thing. Spain and Portugal become world superpowers overnight from nowhere.
How did that happen? And people don't do their research in terms of where did they come from.
Yeah, I mean, what were they doing before this?
That's right.
Nothing. They were. This goes back to what I was saying last week about these families, these groups move with the empires. So they move, then they create these empires. This is a great example.
But it begs the question: why Spain and Portugal?
Okay, it was
geographically. Is that
yes?
Right. Okay.
It's positioned to America, basically.
Right.
From Europe, it's the end point of Europe, and England serves the same purpose. That's why a lot of them went to England as well. But England was mainly infiltrated by the Venetians rather than the Genovese. The Genovese went to Spain, Portugal, and the Venetians did the same thing, but over to England.
Right. Okay.
Which I don't really talk about in this particular article. So the Genovese merchants and bankers are moving into Spain at this time. Another interesting point that I don't get into is they had to get rid of their rivals in Spain and Portugal. And who were they at the time? The Jews. So then at this time, there's the expulsion of the Jews as well. Okay, so the Jews are just a merchant class themselves. They're they're competitors to this other merchant group. Okay, so they're just fighting amongst themselves. All this thing about Christianity, Judaism, it's just a veil, people. It's just a veil. These people, they're different families, they're mafia groups, different.
That's
doesn't
right.
matter to them. Okay, so you've got these merchants in the Jewish merchants, which they need to get rid of, so then they can take over operations, basically. But then there's another story there where the Jews sort of come back at them through the Dutch. I mean, they've got their own things happening, so they're fighting. They're fighting against each other, over the street, the block. So the old mafia terms, you got
and nothing has changed even to this present.
No, it's the same formula. This is the thing that people. They're just mafia, man. It's like, okay, we have these 5 blocks. You keep those 5 blocks.
That's right. Classic Goodfellas type stories. Yeah.
You got to simplify this stuff for people to understand it on the street level. So they're funneling all their funds or all their resources into Spain, Portugal, building up those empires and funding those voyages to the New World. It wasn't discovery; it was opening. It was open for business. They already had it.
Yeah, unveiling. Right? Yeah.
Yeah, unveiling. Opening for business. Okay, now we can officially It was official discovery.
Was this going on for centuries, millennia? Like, does history go back that far? So this would have been going on for
Yeah,
a while.
well, there's evidence that Genoa knew about this hundreds of years before, at least 150 years before, the discovery
Wow.
of by Christopher Columbus. And I put something into the article where there's a document that was discovered in the 1300s, indicating that America already knew, so that
Yes.
Genoa already knew about America. But I'm sure there are, the Vikings, the Scandinavians knew about it, which there's evidence for that in North America. So there's evidence that the Phoenicians were aware of North America, long before Columbus came on the scene. The Genovese and the Venetians are somehow connected to the Phoenicians, either by family connections or anyway. But that's a discussion for another time. Like I said earlier, I don't mention Christopher Columbus that
Mm-hmm.
much, but I do mention that he was connected with a lot of these Genovese families, merchant families that had relocated to Spain. So he was surrounded by these groups.
Because he was born in Genoa.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
historically proven.
Yeah, so he would have known these. Anyone of his level would have known people of the importance of these individuals, these merchant families. So he would have known
Mm.
them. And actually, there's one called the Centurions,
Yes, I was
a
interested in reading it as
Genovese.
well. Yes, yes, this is great.
Yeah, a Genovese dynasty of financiers that people don't really. I mean, I didn't even know about them before I started researching.
Mm.
And at the time, the 1400s, this family were like the Rothschilds. They were the
Yes.
ones, and people don't know about these people.
Talking about the centurions.
Yeah, they were basically funding again a lot of the activities around Europe, funding royal dynasties, monarchs, also involved with a lot of trade, commercial, activities. And I found that Christopher Columbus used to work for them. He was working for this family at one point, and his brother continued. Christopher Columbus's brother continued to work for this family even
Mm.
after the discovery of America. Yeah, I think this family was definitely involved as one of the main families behind the push to America and opening up America. And also, I found that this family were one of the main founders of the Bank of St. George, the
Yes.
Bank of St. George in Genoa, which was at the time the world's first public modern bank. So a lot of modern banking stems from Genoa as well. So they were one of the main founders. And yeah, this family were all over Europe. Basically, they had offices all over, London, Belgium, France, all over.
Mm.
So
Mm. And if you go further on in history, when, let's, inverted commas, Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492, his name went on to become, part of what we now know as being the Collins family in the US. But that's, again, another discussion for another time.
well, yeah, I've heard researchers say that that could be the case, but I mean that family is a Roman nobility family,
Mm.
whereas the ones I'm talking about here are
Specifically,
Genovese.
Genovese, yes.
But they could have been, intermarried, joined forces at some point.
I'm just trying to make the connection because the Centurions were funding most of these expeditions. Then it just makes sense that they would have been funding Columbus. And once Columbus arrived or unveiled, let's call it, they would have continued to fund Columbus. So I'm just literally fast tracking to how his name, and we're not going to get into Christopher Columbus, but his name, Cristoforo Colombo, or in the Spanish version, Cristobal Colon, became the Collins family of the US today. It makes perfect sense. But again, that's a slight tangent.
Yeah, another point that I want to make is that these nations like Spain, or the Kingdom of Spain and Portugal, that became the superpowers of their time.
Mhm.
And back to us talking about nation states and what nation states, corporations, basically.
Yes.
So these kingdoms of Spain and Portugal were basically nation fronts for these these merchant families. So instead of these merchant families, they like to work behind the scenes, right? They're not going to
Mm.
put their face on it. So they'll allow Portugal and the monarchs to get the glory, or Spain. They don't want the glory. They just want the profits. You
Correct.
know,
Mm.
these countries are set up to take the glory, and the fame for what's happening behind the scenes. But
Mm.
also found that once Europeans went to the American continent, one of the biggest resources that they started extracting was silver. And again, who was controlling the silver at that time were the Genovese. So they were just shipping the Spanish were shipping it all over to Europe, and was basically going straight to Genoa, and then from Genoa, funding their various operations or hoarding it or whatever. But now I was just going to read a quote. Yeah, there was a quote that I came across, and it goes like this: Silver is born in the Americas, passes through Spain, and dies in Genoa. Popular
Mm.
saying. Well, I came across that quote. I go, wow, yeah. I mean, they're telling you what's going on there.
Yeah, in plain sight. But you mentioned the Bank of St George, which was created
Yeah.
in Genoa. Did you want to talk about banking in this instance and how it led to what is now
Well,
the biggest bank in America? Or
I mean, there's more to banking than I highlight in this
of
particular
course.
article. I've got another article that covers really the birth of modern banking or European banking,
Mm.
and that's in another post. Wolves in sheep's clothing, I called it.
Our listeners
And
can obviously go to your Substack to read
yeah,
other articles that are connected to what we're talking about today. But did you want to fast track in terms of the
yeah,
bank as a side note?
what I found is, after 100 or so years of Genoa being all over the Americas, they sort of disappear. They sort of disappear from history. And standard historians tell us, oh, okay, well, then basically around the 1600s, Genovese overextended themselves and went bankrupt, basically.
Mm,
This is
mm,
what
mm.
they tell us.
Sure.
I don't know, you're on top of the world, you own everything, and then all of a sudden you go bankrupt. That's
Yeah.
the official story.
Maybe it was by design to try and shift the view.
Yeah,
R-
exactly. But what they're doing is they're moving the money around. So perhaps they do it because they don't want too many eyes on it. People are starting to say, "Oh, yeah, look at that, Venice, or look at Genoa,"
Exactly. Mm,
and then they'll move somewhere else before people notice too much. So a lot of these Genovese sort of disappear after that point. Another angle is the Venetian influence in America as well, which I don't get into in this article, but they sort of started coming across through the English, and that's where the English start moving in onto what was predominantly a Spanish colony to begin
sure.
with,
Yep.
and sort of Vatican approved Spanish, but then the English under the king come in through the coast and take that region, and then I mean that goes up to the founding of the 13 colonies and
Mm, 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 mm.
the civil war there. But so what I think happened there was, and there's this long debate about, oh, the Vatican still own America. And I mean, I don't see that. I see that the English own it. The English took it from the Vatican, took it. And again, that's the other group that the Spanish kicked out of Spain, basically the
Mm.
Jewish group. So yeah, the Genovese kicked the Spanish group out of Spain, moved into establishing America, and then they sort of came back at the Genovese with the English and took it back, basically.
Right.
So then I found that these Genovese sort of disappear, but they don't really disappear because then they pop up again in the modern era. I find this a coincidence that the Bank of America, which was founded in 1904 as the Bank of Italy,
Mm.
was founded by a Genovese. Could have been. I mean, Italy's got lots of regions, as you know. Couldn't it be someone else? No, it had to be
Correct.
from Genoa.
Somebody from
I don't.
Venice or somebody from Rome or but that to this day, that bank, the Bank of America, is second only to JP Morgan, which obviously everybody knows. So they haven't
Yeah,
disappeared. They've just
no.
rebranded to make it a little less obvious.
So the Genovese arm of this, global merchant caste has a foot in America, and this is probably their little section that they're allowed to control of America, which owns, by the way, almost 50% of BlackRock.
That's
So,
right.
so these families are probably still, this is probably their operation, you know? And what will you say? JP Morgan could be the British arm. You know, you got to go back and think of it like a mafia. You know what I mean? Mafia. In America, there's more than one mafia family. There's lots of different mafia families, and they all got their little, piece of the pie. It's
Yep.
no different with these merchant families.
Yep.
So, they might all operate in America and fight over, who's going to be ruling the next 4 years, or who's going to be ruling this section of America or this part of America.
Is this why they say, why there's common reference to, the 13 families? You briefly touched on it just a moment ago. It's relevant to what you're talking about now in terms of everyone having a piece of the block.
Yeah. I mean, the people who came up with, I think, I don't know if it was a researcher called Coleman or something, who first mentioned the 13 bloodlines or something like that. I read it years ago. I think they point to the black nobility as being those 13 bloodlines.
Right. Okay. Yep.
Which the black nobility are ancient
Yes, that's
Roman
right.
families.
Yes.
So I'm not sure how they connect with the merchants that I've traced through history. Perhaps they're their own merchant families from Rome. Because Rome would have had a group as well. I see. It's clearer for me in places like Genoa and Venice, and then Holland later, and England, than it is from Rome. Rome wasn't known. It wasn't really known for its banking.
Even with the Medicis?
Yeah, but that's what I was going to say. They were based in Florence. I'm not saying that Rome doesn't have power. I'm just saying it's probably a different kind of power. So yeah, the 13 bloodlines is not something I sort of extensively researched.
Yeah, I'm sure there is some connection. You'd be silly not to think there wasn't after what we've just discussed. And
well, they, like I said, these families marry into each other. So I'm sure they've married into, these other merchant families.
Sure.
Like we said once, I think it was last week, how the Genovese merchant family, the Doge, became the monarch of Monaco.
So historically, how do you see this? History tells us that America was discovered in 1492, but we know, and based on your research, that it was used as a source of assets, be it minerals, resources, etc., for hundreds of years before that. So, where does this all lead to? Does this have any impact? If people have written about this over time, that America wasn't actually invented by Christopher Columbus, but the masses don't know this. So, how do you think moving forward this will change our perception about who America is and its relevance to Spain and Portugal, and then its relevance to Italy, and then furthermore its relevance to Genoa? And how does where does this leave Genoa today? Because it still is a centre for trade, as it has been for centuries.
It's nowhere near its importance. These merchants move base. They don't really leave much once they leave. The only place I can think of is Venice that's retained its beauty. Compared to a lot of these other places that these places these families, these merchants have established themselves. So this to our discussion last week about what's America going to become?
Yes.
I mean, America's relatively still quite fresh and new. I mean, if you look at Venice, I mean, it was 1,000 years of Venetian power. America might still have a long way to go before it gets, abandoned. But then you've got the issue of where they're going to go next.
So could I ask you a question? You may not know the answer to this.
Okay.
So, but based on the history that you've just taken us through, can you maybe hypothesize in terms of who owns America? If the Genovese had such an impact in the discovery of the country,
Yeah.
Is there still influence there? I know we talk about the Bank of America, which used to be the Bank of Italy, etc. Now, I know
Yeah.
that our last podcast we spoke about, the City of London being the center of financial control globally, etc. So, do you have a point of view on who owns America and who
Okay.
controls America?
Well, if it's this Genovese group, they're hiding it quite well because I don't see it. I see that the British arm being one of main powers there. There's obviously then the Jewish group
Mm.
that we're all aware of. But I mean, that to me, people got to be you got to be an idiot not to see that Israel run the American political establishment, right? Be a
Of
moron
course,
not to
but
see that. Yeah,
but
okay, but what I want to say is that's been purposely done that way so you can see it. I mean,
mm,
if you're smart, they show your hand as obviously as these people are showing it. I mean,
mm.
you got ADL, you got APEC. They just say it. We
Okay.
run the
So that being the case, if it's in your face, now you can go down two lines of thought. One is, they're doing it on purpose, and as we know, let's call it Freemasonry, let's call it whatever, is that it's in plain sight, and they need to do it because that's their
no.
belief. That's the one line of thought. The other line of thought is somebody else in control of that? Are they doing it on purpose for another reason?
I think they're being see. That's right. That's what I believe. Another group is setting them up or making hiding themselves behind this whole Zionist
Who do you think they are? The Freemasons? Is it
I mean, Freemasons. There's a Jewish element in that as well.
the
But
Freemasons is relatively young? If you go back to the Knights Templar, for example, which is where
it,
Freemasonry first was established, let's say, do you think they came in and said, "We're running the show now"?
No, Freemasonry is even older than that and goes back. It's funny you say that because I just did an article on it called "The Mysteries of the Kabiri," and it goes back to the old ancient mysteries of the East, Persia and
Oh,
that
okay.
Mesopotamia area and,
Yes,
and, and
yes, yeah,
ancient Greece.
yeah.
They're just an offshoot of that. So they've been around for a long time. They
Mm.
just, I guess that's the modern version. Freemasonry is the modern version of it.
But getting back to the question,
Okay, yeah,
yeah,
getting back. I'm not saying that obviously there's no Jewish influence in America. There
mm,
is,
mm,
but it seems to me that they're the only ones who are being exposed at the moment. Because I believe there's more than one group in
mm,
America trying to, steer the power of America globally. There's more than one group, and this Genovese group is one that you don't hear much about. Then you've obviously got the English group, the Pilgrims, which was discussed last week
yes,
from the City of London,
yeah,
and then obviously you got a Jewish group, and
mm,
then which I think there's two Jewish groups. I think there's a Jewish group, and then I think there's what the modern Israel Zionist movement
mm,
group is.
mm.
I believe that group is run by the British. I mean, if you look at Zionism and the
Well, of
roots
course
of
it is.
Zionism,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's all British, right?
Well, of course it is. Yeah. Well, when I say of course, I don't. I shouldn't presume that everyone knows that. But if you know your history, then yes, it's run by the British. It was
Yeah,
established by the Israel was established by the British.
yeah. So yeah, that's another group there. So, but again, I always tell people, always remind people to always look at it like mafia families. I mean, you
Mm,
just look
mm,
at Italy. You've got the Sicilian mafia, you've got
mm.
the Calabrese mafia, you've got mafia in Naples.
Naples. Yeah.
Exactly. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's not one group that run the whole of Italy. And
Mm,
and and sometimes these different mafia families, get together for a common cause, maybe,
yeah.
Sometimes they combine their forces for a common cause,
Mm.
and sometimes they fight amongst each other.
Yeah. So my deduction here would be that there's a heavy Italian influence in America. Okay.
Yeah, there is.
Not just what we see, what we as humanity see as the mafia, but just think back about migration of Italians to America. They were one of the first major group of people to go to America. So
Yeah, they're one of the top four. I think it's Germans. The top four, I think, are Germans, English, Irish and Italian.
So you would think that based on the discussion that we've had today in terms of the Genovese, Christopher Columbus connection, etc., that Italy still has, or the Italians, I should say, not Italy, the country, but Italians still have a major stranglehold on the USA.
A lot of researchers would say, yeah, but that's all Vatican run. The Vatican have the power there,
Mm.
rather than these merchant families.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think it's the other way around.
I,
Um,
I I agree with you. And this is the point that I wanted to make earlier about, the Collins family being one of the, the Rockefeller type families in the US. The Collins family dates back to its roots to Columbus and
Back to the Roman nobility.
yeah, even further back. So this is what
And
the point
yeah,
I'm trying to make is that Italians or the history of them still have a lot of control within the United States.
yeah, and that just as a point here, that family, Colonna family,
Mm, mm.
had a hand in establishing Christianity in ancient Rome as well,
Oh,
which many
okay.
people don't know about, and there's something I will write about in future. Yeah,
Interesting.
so yeah, they were there when that was happening.
So, based on obviously this article that you've written and all the research that you've done in connecting articles, and we'll talk about how people can access these articles. What's your conclusion? What's your uptake in terms of how history has been told versus
Okay,
how history has happened, and
yeah,
what impact that's going to have on the world
yeah,
as we know
yeah.
it today?
Historians tend to focus on nation states, as you know, throughout history. They'll talk about Spain, they'll talk about France or England and what's going on there, but they rarely talk about the people, which are these merchant families.
Mm.
Goes back to what I was saying, merchants make history. They're the ones directing the events. They're the ones directing expansions, colonization, the economies, trade. Listen, if you don't have commerce and you don't have trade, you don't have civilization.
Mm.
Okay? This is the other thing about merchants. They're not all bad in the sense that we would have stayed in our small little communities if it wasn't for the merchant
Mm.
class that decided to expand, to start importing, to start exporting, to start negotiating with neighbors.
Yes.
And yeah, the modern world, the civilization as we know it, especially in the, well, you could say no, East and West, is because of the activities of the merchants.
Yes.
So some good did come out of it. It's not all bad. Going back to your question, historians they don't focus much on the activities of these merchants for some reason. Okay. They
Mm.
they point to the nations doing all this activity. The nations say, oh, France invaded here, or
That's
Spain
right.
colonized this and that. Yeah,
That's
but
right.
who's
Yeah.
doing this? It's merchants doing it. It's not the king all of a sudden decided, oh, I see that piece of land there. Oh, I think I'll take
I
it.
think I might take it.
No,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's always got a commercial reason for it. Usually you'll find that, they've taken that land because it had resources there, had, silver mines or gold mines. It's not focused on in history. You're definitely not taught it in, what do you call it, high school, as we know, college. If you want to study this stuff, you sort of got to go off on your own and look into it.
Yeah. So, look, as we come to a close of what I have seen as being a very, very informative discussion, and obviously a lot of research from your end. I guess the message here is that people just need to continuously question and not just accept things for what they are, because a little bit of research can tell you that Columbus wasn't Spanish. A little bit of research can tell you that the banking system was not invented in London or the United States, and a little bit of research can tell you that in a lot of ways history has been misinterpreted, or at the very least misinformed,
Yeah, history has been purposely hidden from us, obscured.
which then I guess begs the question, why do we sit back and accept what we're being told? And unless, there are people like you and me, and particularly with your research, that, we are given a false narrative, if
Mm.
that makes sense, But just to finish up, are there any
Yeah, always.
final?
Oh, just to go back. Sorry, just to go
Yeah.
back on that. My train of thought has always been follow the money.
Yes.
So that really gives you the clues to where the truth lies.
So if you're interested in reading more, as I said, the Substack channel for Phoenician Hunter is an amazing channel of historical facts and research where there's no topic that's forbidden. No belief goes unchallenged. And it's those who, people that are interested in knowledge and the true history will not be disappointed. I can assure you of that. So that's been another great discussion. If you were interested in our discussion today, based on Phoenician Hunter's article, Genoa Opens America, then visit the Substack channel, substack.com/at Phoenician Hunter, or listen to our podcasts on YouTube, youtube.com/at Tesla 369. Thanks, and we look forward to having another great in-depth chat on our next podcast.